April 13, 1972. An Loc, Binh Long Province, 60 miles north of Saigon. Dawn. NVA tanks come down Ngo Quyen Street with their turrets open and their commanders standing in the hatches. T-54s and PT-76s in column, machine gunners standing on the hulls, advancing ahead of their infantry. 40 armored vehicles in the assault. The 5th ARVN command post is 2 blocks ahead. Colonel William Miller, the senior American advisor, gets on the radio and asks for Stukas. He has no Stukas. What he has, minutes south, is a pair of AH-1 Cobras of F Battery, 79th Aerial Rocket Artillery, 1st Cavalry Division. The lead ship is flown by Major Larry McKay, call sign Serpent Six, with Chief Warrant Officer Barry McIntyre in the front seat. Before the morning is out, more than 20 Soviet-built tanks will be smoking on the streets of An Loc. The NVA will not push armor into the open in daylight again. The Bell AH-1 arrived at Bien Hoa Air Base on August 30, 1967. 12 airframes attached to the new equipment training team. 6 days later, on September 4th, one of them sank a Viet Cong sampan, the first Cobra combat kill of the war. By the October, the 334th Armed Helicopter Company was operational. By the start of 1968, the AH-1 was replacing the older UH-1B gunships across every air cavalry and aerial rocket artillery unit in country. What made the Cobra different was the shape. The Huey was 100 inches across at the fuselage. The Cobra is 38. The pilot sat in the rear, the gunner in the front, in a tandem cockpit barely wider than their shoulders. A man at 300 meters with an AK-47 looking up at a Cobra on a gun run was aiming at a target the width of a phone booth. The armament was carried under the chin and out on the stub wings. The M230 chin turret mounted some combination of 2 M130 miniguns, 2 M129 40mm grenade launchers, or one of each, which was the most common load. The minigun fired 4,000 rounds a minute from a 4,000-round ammunition can. The grenade launcher, which crews called the chunker for the sound it made, threw 40mm rounds at 450 rounds a minute from a magazine of 300. The stub wings carried 2.75-inch folding fin aerial rockets in 7-tube or 19-tube pods. A fully loaded Cobra rolled in with 76 rockets, 4,000 bullets, and 300 grenades on the rails. The doctrine the Cobras flew under was the pink team. One OH-6A Cayuse, the small light observation helicopter the troops called the Loach, flew low and slow at the treetops looking for the enemy. One Cobra circled 1,500 feet above. If the Loach drew fire, the Cobra was on the firing position in seconds. The Loach trolled, the Snake punished. For the NVA and the Viet Cong, the lesson came fast. Through 1968, 1969, and into 1970, anyone who fired at a Loach from open ground found a Cobra in his front yard inside 30 seconds. Anyone who tried to move heavy equipment in daylight along a known supply route got the same. The captured documents that surfaced across those years said the same thing in different dialects of Vietnamese. Do not fire on the small helicopter if the larger one is above you. The larger one is the death. By the early months of 1972, there were more than 700 Cobras in Vietnam. They had flown more than 1 million operational hours. The historian Peter Davies, working from captured directives and post-war PAVN sources, has written that the standing practice in NVA units in active contact was to avoid shooting at the Cobra whenever possible, because the retribution was massive and instant. That practice had been tested at scale once before. In February 1971, Operation Lam Son 7-1 sent the South Vietnamese Army across the border into Laos to attack the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The NVA was waiting. They had moved 170 to 200 anti-aircraft guns into the hills above Route 9. They had the ZSU-23-4 Shilka in its first appearance of the war, a radar-guided 4-barrel 23mm system with an effective ceiling of 4,000 feet. They had every anti-aircraft cannon the Soviets had built in 20 years. In 45 days of fighting, more than 100 American helicopters were shot down. Around 600 others were damaged so severely they had to be cannibalized. The lesson the NVA took out of Laos was that helicopters could be killed, but only if you put more guns in the air than the helicopters could fly through, and only if you accepted the casualties your own gunners would take when the rockets came in. Most NVA commanders, given a choice, were not eager to repeat the experiment. In April 1972, they were given no choice. On the morning of March 30, 1972, North Vietnam launched the Easter Offensive. General Vo Nguyen Giap committed 14 divisions and 26 separate regiments to a conventional invasion of South Vietnam. He sent 3 of those divisions, more than 35,000 men with armor and artillery, across the Cambodian border at 3 points, aiming to take Highway 13 and drive on Saigon. The town of Loc Ninh, 15 miles north of Loc Sin, on Highway 13, fell on April 7th after 2 days of assaults. The road south was open. An Loc, provincial capital of Binh Long, sat in the way.
The defenders of An Loc were the 5th ARVN Division, the 81st Airborne Ranger Battalion, and a small cell of American advisors. The senior American advisor on the ground was Colonel William Miller. The Easter Offensive was the first time ARVN forces had faced Soviet-built armor. They had M72 Law rockets and not much else against 40 tanks. At dawn on April 13, after several days of artillery preparation, the NVA pushed a combined arms assault into An Loc. The tank column moving down Ngo Quyen Street toward the 5th Division command post was made up of T-54s and PT-76s, with the turret hatches open and the commanders standing in them. They were ahead of their infantry. An ARVN private named Binh Duan Quang fired a Law into the side of one tank and immobilized it. The cry of "Tiet Giap," tank, ran down the line of South Vietnamese defenders. Miller got on the radio. He said, "Send me some Stukas," meaning the World War II German dive bombers that had killed armor in 1940 and 1941. He had no dive bombers. What he had was a flight of 2 AH-1G Cobras from Battery F, 79th Aerial Artillery, 1st Cavalry Division Air Mobile. The unit's call sign was Blue Max. The lead aircraft was flown by Major Larry McKay, with Chief Warrant Officer Barry McIntyre in the gunner's seat. The wingman was First Lieutenant Steve Shields, with Captain Bill Causey. The Cobras came up out of Lai Khe loaded with heat rockets. The 2.75-inch heat rocket was the high-explosive anti-tank version of the standard folding thin rocket. It used a shaped charge designed to punch a small hole in armor plate and detonate inside the vehicle. Up to that morning, no one knew whether they would work. The Cobras had carried heat rockets on tank hunting flights in earlier weeks. Each time, the tanks had hidden by the time the gun runs began. As the flight approached An Loc, McKay called Miller and identified the flight. Miller tried to wave them off. The NVA had moved a heavy anti-aircraft ring around the town. ZSU-23-4 Shilkas and Strela 2 missile teams were already in position around the southern approach. Miller said the defenses were too thick. McKay answered that he had heat and was coming in regardless.
The lead Cobra rolled in on the column at the head of Ngo Quyen Street. McIntyre flew a wing over and dove at the lead tank at an angle of about 35 degrees from 5,000 feet, fired several heat rockets at close range into the engine compartment of the lead T-54, and pulled out at 3,000. The turret blew off the lead tank, and the hull cooked off from the ammunition stowage. The Cobra came around for the middle of the column. The wingman attacked the rear vehicle. Within minutes, the column was burning at the head, middle, and tail. The vehicles between had nowhere to go. Over the course of the engagement that day and the days that followed, Blue Max Cobras were credited with destroying more than 20 Soviet crewed tanks. The combined arms attack on April 13 was stopped. Jap had to convert the offensive into a siege. The siege lasted into late June. The NVA tried again in May with mass infantry attacks supported by armor and dug-in artillery. The B-52s came in for those, dropping their loads inside 3,000 feet of the perimeter. The Cobras flew close-in fire support every day they could get airborne. In 2 months and 29 days, Blue Max as a unit lost 10 of its 13 Cobras to anti-aircraft fire and wrote them off as total losses. 8 pilots were killed. The names of the 8, in the order they died, were Chief Warrant Officer Charles Windler and Captain Henry Spengler, shot down April 5th. Captain Robert Williams and Captain Rodney Strobridge, May 11th. Chief Warrant Officer John Henn and Chief Warrant Officer Ike Hosaka, May 22nd. First Lieutenant Stephen Shields, the wingman from April 13th, and Captain Edward Northrup, June 20th. What killed them was what the NVA had brought up the trail through the winter. The ZSU-23-4 Shilka, with its 23mm rounds, could engage targets out to 3,000 meters at 4,000 feet of altitude. It had been used in Laos in 1971 and was now in country. The other new thing was the Strela II, the Soviet shoulder-launched heat-seeking missile, designated SA-7 Grail by NATO. The first known SA-7 firing in South Vietnam took place in May 1972. Between April 28th and July 14th of that year, the NVA fired 161 Strela missiles, downing 14 fixed-wing aircraft and 10 helicopters. Across the whole war, the Strela would account for 10 AH-1 Cobras destroyed. The NVA standing doctrine after An Loc was specific and issued to every senior commander on the Southern Front. Tanks were not to be advanced in column down open roads in daylight if helicopter air was available. Armor was to move at night or under heavy cover. Anti-aircraft assets were to be brought forward with the tanks and to engage helicopter gunships at the moment of their first firing pass, not before. Crews caught in the open were to abandon vehicles and disperse on foot. The order, in spirit, if not in those words, was never to engage the Cobra in the open. The Cobra was not invulnerable. The Strela could kill it, and the Shilka could kill it, but killing it cost more than the offensive could afford. The U.S. Army sent 824 AH-1G Cobras to Vietnam. 303 were lost. 235 pilots and 12 crewmen were killed in them. The last AH-1 in active duty service with the U.S. Army flew its final flight at Schofield Barracks in Hawaii on March 15, 1999, 37 years after the first one landed at Bien Hoa. The aircraft is still in service today with the United States Marine Corps and with the armed forces of several other nations. Of the original 12 Cobras that came off the freighter at Bien Hoa on August 30, 1967, one airframe survives, tail number 6615259. It is called the Virginia Rose II, and it now sits in the collection of the Vietnam Helicopters Museum. Every modern military helicopter on every Air Force on Earth now carries infrared warning equipment and decoy flares. That equipment exists because of what the Strela teams did to the Cobras of Blue Max over An Loc in the spring of 1972. The lesson the NVA learned from the Cobra is in every air defense manual since. The Cobra is the reason it had to be written down.